In criminal investigations, investigators deliberately withhold specific details from the public to verify witness statements and test suspect knowledge. This practice creates what's known as holdback evidence, information only the perpetrator and investigators would know. When a suspect reveals these protected details during interrogation, it often indicates direct involvement in the crime. Medical examiner findings are typically among the most closely guarded pieces of investigative information. These details might include precise wound characteristics, time of death indicators, or specific biological evidence. The revelation of such information can expose a suspect's guilty knowledge, even without a direct confession. This creates what investigators call a knowledge boundary violation, crossing from what should be unknown to the suspect. Such violations have been documented in numerous criminal cases where suspects inadvertently revealed privileged information. This case represents a specific category of investigative failure, where the integrity of a homicide inquiry is compromised from within. While exact locations and dates are often obscured in public reporting to protect identities, the investigative framework remains recognizable. The process typically involves a serious crime, a person of interest brought in for questioning, and a detective methodically working through evidence. Interrogations in such cases aim to gauge a suspect's knowledge against established facts, testing their account against physical evidence and witness statements. This methodical approach is standard in homicide investigations, where building a timeline and verifying alibis are crucial steps. However, when the investigation itself becomes compromised, these standard procedures can be manipulated or bypassed entirely. The goal remains constant: to establish truth through evidence. But the path to that truth can be deliberately obstructed from within the system. This phenomenon occurs when a suspect's statements during interrogation contain details that align too closely with confidential investigative reports. The accuracy isn't about general crime knowledge, but specific forensic details that should only be known to investigators and medical examiners. Documented cases show this pattern. Suspects describe injury locations, wound dimensions, or post-mortem conditions with precision matching official records. This creates a paradox for investigators. The information suggests involvement, but its source indicates prior unauthorized access rather than direct participation. The specificity often extends beyond what could be guessed or inferred, including technical medical terminology or exact measurements. This pattern distinguishes between genuine criminal knowledge and information obtained through leaks, creating investigative complications. The challenge becomes determining whether the suspect participated in the crime or merely obtained confidential details through other means. This scenario forces investigators to separate the crime itself from the separate issue of information security breaches within their systems. The precise number and orientation of wounds can reveal the weapon used, the attacker's position, and even their emotional state. Specific trace materials, like unique fibers or soil types not publicly known, can directly link a suspect to a scene. The exact mechanism of death, whether blunt force, sharp force, or asphyxiation, is a cornerstone fact that shapes the entire investigation. This level of detail is not for public consumption. It is held under a tightly controlled chain of custody. Access is typically restricted to the coroner's office, which determines the official cause and manner of death. The lead detectives on the case also have access, as this information is critical for building a timeline and suspect profile. Finally, the prosecution team requires this information to construct a legally sound case for trial. This restricted access creates a firewall, ensuring the integrity of the facts until they are presented in a court of law. Releasing evidence to the public or a suspect before trial constitutes a serious breach of investigative protocol. Such breaches can compromise the integrity of the entire legal process, similar to how revealing a hand in poker changes the game. When a suspect becomes aware of this breach during an interrogation, it typically triggers an immediate internal reaction. This reaction is a recognized psychological and procedural turning point in the interview dynamic. The interrogating officers, recognizing the protocol violation, are compelled to halt the interview immediately. This mandatory stop is a standard damage control procedure, intended to prevent further contamination of the case. The interruption creates a stark pause, shifting the focus from gathering statements to managing the procedural error. This sequence illustrates how a single breach of protocol can derail an investigation, forcing a reactive rather than proactive stance. The investigation's focus often shifts from the suspect to the source of the leak. This redirection occurs because identifying how information escaped is crucial to understanding the breach. The potential sources for such a leak are typically limited to a few common points of failure. One source can be an officer speaking informally, where confidential details are shared outside secure channels. Another is a physical report left unsecured, such as on a desk or in an unlocked cabinet, making it accessible to unauthorized personnel. The third common source involves digital records being accessed without proper authorization through compromised logins or network vulnerabilities. These methods represent systemic weaknesses rather than isolated events, highlighting patterns in how sensitive information is compromised. Understanding these limited pathways is often the key to containing the damage and preventing future disclosures. The original leaker's intent remains a critical unknown in many investigations. Was the leak careless gossip shared among colleagues or acquaintances? Could it have been an attempt to intimidate the suspect by making them aware they were being watched? Or was it a deliberate act of sabotage, aimed at derailing the official inquiry from the start? This question of motive is often left unanswered. Once an internal probe is launched, the public record typically goes silent. Details are sealed, and the narrative is controlled behind closed doors. This silence itself becomes a part of the story, leaving room for speculation and unresolved questions. This common misunderstanding often arises in high-profile cases where evidence handling becomes a public focus. The contamination of an investigation refers to procedural errors that compromise evidence integrity. Such contamination can occur through improper chain of custody, cross-contamination at crime scenes, or biased investigative techniques. This differs from proving innocence, which requires affirmative evidence that someone else committed the act. In legal systems, contaminated evidence typically becomes inadmissible rather than exonerating the accused. The distinction is crucial because contaminated investigations can lead to wrongful convictions when combined with other factors. This pattern appears across various jurisdictions when procedural safeguards fail during evidence collection. Understanding this distinction helps separate procedural failures from determinations of guilt or innocence. When a suspect is guilty but evidence is tainted, the legal system faces a fundamental conflict. Illicit information, such as evidence obtained through misconduct, can poison an entire case. This creates a procedural dilemma where the truth of guilt clashes with the integrity of the process. A defense attorney's primary strategy becomes arguing their client cannot receive a fair trial. They contend that tainted evidence and procedural errors invalidate the prosecution's position. This legal argument shifts focus from the suspect's actions to the authorities' methods. A common misrepresentation frames the discovery of such errors as a brilliant detective moment. In reality, these are systemic failures, not triumphs, complicating justice rather than delivering it. The detective's moment of realization isn't about outsmarting a criminal mastermind. Instead, they discover their entire case has been compromised before reaching the courtroom. This represents a profound professional failure within the justice system. The practical insight here reveals systemic vulnerabilities rather than criminal genius. These vulnerabilities can occur at multiple points in the investigative process. Similar patterns appear in various types of cases where evidence handling is critical. The focus shifts from individual wrongdoing to institutional weaknesses. This understanding changes how such failures should be addressed and prevented. The need-to-know principle is a fundamental security protocol in law enforcement. It restricts sensitive information only to personnel directly involved in an operation or investigation. Every individual who learns confidential details unnecessarily becomes a potential point of failure. This vulnerability can stem from accidental leaks, coercion, or simple human error. In the legal system, breaches of this principle can have catastrophic consequences. They provide textbook grounds for evidence to be suppressed or for an entire case to be dismissed. This procedural failure undermines the pursuit of justice, regardless of the underlying facts. Maintaining strict information control is therefore not just policy, but a critical operational safeguard. The narrative often fixates on the suspect's unsettling knowledge, suggesting almost supernatural insight. This focus obscures a more common and damaging reality: simple human error. The true breach occurs long before any formal questioning. In moments of procedural failure, it can be a confidential conversation overheard where it shouldn't have been held, or a sensitive file left unattended on a desk, accessible to unauthorized eyes. Sometimes, it's the casual sharing of a login credential between colleagues, eroding digital security. These are not acts of masterful criminal intellect, but failures of basic protocol and trust. The critical lesson is to scrutinize narratives that highlight eerie knowledge, as they often mask these foundational lapses.
If the veil stirred, subscribe and meet the next encounter.